It's a crisp autumn morning in Queensport, and the sunrise has brought fog along Chedabucto Bay, but it's going to be a beautiful morning for hiking. Here, along what was once an important road, the Queensport Road, but is now the Barren Land Trail, and it's where I'm on my walkabout today. This trail starts right across from the historic Queensport Light and next to St. Vincent de Paul's Church. The Queensport Light was built in 1882 by James MacDonald of Guysborough on Rock Island. For a while, it was known as the Rock Island Lighthouse, and then the Cole Harbour Lighthouse. It had 17 lighthouse keepers over the years until it closed in 1867. In 1979, the government offered the lighthouse for sale at a price of $1,000. But the sale was conditional on the building being removed from Rock Island. But local resident Daryl Spittle felt the lighthouse should remain and be restored. And as a result, the Fishermen's Lighthouse Association was formed in 1979, and the island was developed as a historic site and park. In 2005, the Queensport Lighthouse was placed on the Canadian Register of Historic Places, and in 2015, it was declared a Heritage Lighthouse. St. Vincent de Paul Church is also historically important. It was formally recognized as a historic place in 1995 and was added to the Canadian Register of Historic Places in 2009. The church itself was built in 1897 when Queensport was still called Cole Harbour. Now what's interesting is the Irish congregation at the time met in private homes, and so having a church meant they finally had somewhere to meet all together. The church was built in the Gothic Revival style with Gothic windows and has granite foundation stones which come from the Queensport quarry. It is tall by the standards of Queensport and sits on a hill. As such, it was an important navigation aid for local fishermen. The Queensport quarry, where the foundation stones for the church came from, was operated by the Queensport Granite Company in the early 1900s. Now, they actually operated two small quarries, and they would have been located off into the woods, off in this area. They focused mainly on the production of monuments, like gravestones. But some of that stone also ended up in some really important buildings in Nova Scotia. In addition to St. Vincent de Paul's Church, the quarry provided stone for the front steps of Halifax's Lord Nelson Hotel in 1928. The 1919 construction of the provincial building across from the Nova Scotia Legislature also included stone from here. While that building is primarily constructed of sandstone from the Wallace quarries, the foundation was made of granite because it wouldn't absorb water. The stone was cut on site to a rough size and then hauled out, probably along this road, by horses. At the finishing plant, blocks were carved, decorated, and polished. The quarries closed in 1935 and never reopened. This is Southwest Pond Brook, and this is where the power came from to the finishing mill at the quarry. Over there is the original foundation for the bridge that this road used to cross over. The bridge has obviously been replaced over the years. Now I'm traveling this road to Cole Harbour, but it might not be the one that immediately comes to mind. There are two Cole Harbours east of Halifax. One is much bigger and much better known, but both are spelled C-O-L-E. There is some dispute, however, whether the one I'm traveling to at one time was spelled C-O-A-L, just like the rock. Plan 55A in the Crown Land Office shows Guysborough County's Cole Harbour spelled like the rock. That could be an error, and the naming very well could have come by way of Colonel Joseph de Beers, since it appears in his publication Atlantic Neptune, naming the area for Captain Cole of the sloop William, which was captured near the coast of what is now Cole Harbour by a Spanish privateer in 1719. Joseph Frederick Wallet DeBars was an Army officer, military engineer, and cartographer serving with General James Wolfe. He was involved in the 1758 attack on Fortress Louisbourg, but is best known for creating a 4-volume atlas of nautical charts for the coastline of the eastern North Atlantic called Atlantic Neptune. In that publication, he named places, often for people in high offices, in order to curry favor. Some of the charts from the Atlantic Neptune now hang in the former home of his grandson, former Supreme Court Justice W.F. DeBars, which in 2003 became DeBars Manor Inn. Joseph DeBars went on to serve as Lieutenant Governor of Cape Breton and then of Prince Edward Island. He lived a long life, dying at the age of 102. He's buried with his wife under St. George's Round Church in Halifax. A lot of place names in this area, much like a lot of the province, have changed over time. I began my hike in Queensport, which was once called Crow Harbour, and before that the Mi'kmaq called it Nasunajek, meaning place of the reeds or bulrushes. The name was changed to Queensport by the Nova Scotia legislature in 1898 to mark Queen Victoria's Diamond Jubilee. Shetibukto Bay was called Widonik by the Mi'kmaq, meaning having a mouth, referring to the size of the opening of the bay. The name Shetibukto is itself an English misspelling of a French mispronunciation of the Mi'kmaq word Setibuktuk, which the Mi'kmaq used for what we now know as Guysborough. Shetibukto became the name of the bay, and the land area was renamed for Sir Guy Carleton, literally meaning Guy's Borough, which brings me right back to my destination, Cole Harbour, which to the Mi'kmaq was Wonpak, meaning still water. This granite barren marks about the midway point of my hike today. After the break, I'll be headed into the Bonnet Lake Barrens, past an old World War II site, and on to Cole Harbour. I'm on the Barren Land Trail, which was built 150 years ago as the Queensport Road, running from Queensport to Cole Harbour. These days, it's a mixture of hiking and ATV trail. Now, very soon, I'm going to be entering the Bonnet Lake Barrens wilderness area. This granite outcropping is the high point. And from here, I can see Torbay and Sugar Harbour, the Canso Coastal Barrens Wildlife Area over there. And behind me, still hidden in the fog, is Shetibukto Bay and Queensport. I'm now crossing into the Bonnet Lake Barrens Wilderness Area. From this point, the trail becomes part of the Nova Scotia ATV Trail Network, and this is Route 712. It's maintained by the Shetibukto Multi-Use Trails Association. The wilderness area is largely comprised of granite coastal barrens and coastal spruce fir forests. It's an important wilderness area as it is home to ecologically sensitive raised bogs, rare plants, and numerous lakes and waterways. This wilderness area covers about 25,000 acres, and there's a lot of old footpaths around here which are popular for hiking. There are also a lot of lakes, which makes this a popular angling destination. In fact, I'm just coming past the Otter Run Lakes now, and shortly we'll be passing the Blackberry Run Lakes, as well as Rocky Lake. Now, this place was also the site of the Royal Canadian Air Force Radio Detachment 5. I'm approaching Second Cow Lake, and it was on the shore of this lake that in May of 1942, with World War II well underway, the Storm Construction Company arrived and within 3 months had built an entire radar base on this site. In August, 4 technicians and a pilot officer arrived and installed highly classified radar equipment. By September, the station was operational. About 180 airmen were stationed here from 1942 until 1945. The job here was straightforward: to protect Canada from attack. The station monitored Canadian patrol aircraft searching for U-boats, as well as using radar to detect surfaced U-boats themselves off the coast of Nova Scotia. The information they saw on radar was passed on to the fighter aerodrome to respond to any attack. This site was selected because it was 300 feet above sea level, and you could easily see without obstacles for 20 or more miles. Second Cow Lake was sometimes sarcastically referred to by soldiers as lake contamination. And that's because the taste, the smell, even the insect parts that would be drawn in with the water that would be used for drinking made some soldiers stop drinking water altogether. That was until the cook was able to find a new source of water at a drinking well in a community down near Torbay. There really isn't much of anything left in this area to show what was here during the war, but fortunately, Sergeant Mickey Stevens, who was stationed here, took photos and kept a diary, and it gives a really interesting insight into life here. This site had everything you'd imagine, from power stations to a library, administration buildings, workshops, and of course, radar equipment. There is a diary from the winter of 1944, which is amazing to read and gives a great glimpse of life here. For example, on March 7th, 1944, it's written, quote, "Another snowstorm caused apprehension but little trouble. The show as scheduled from Mulgrave wasn't available, much to the annoyance of the men." On December 19th, the difficulty of living conditions came through clearly in the diary, where it is written, quote, "Clear in the morning, becoming overcast with full blizzard in evening. Quarterly overhaul started today. No show tonight due to poor condition of the film. Stake truck failed to return to unit due to snowstorm, after taking 2.5 hours to go 16 miles through 4-foot drifts. Driver stayed at farmhouse approximately 19 miles from station. No mail received tonight due to storm." I say the site had everything you would imagine, but that isn't entirely true. Food was an issue. The base was terribly supplied. Many assume being so close to the ocean, fish would be a common meal. It wasn't. It was 10 months after the opening before fish was first served at the base. But the men were nothing if not creative. Sergeant Stevens went to an apple harvest in the Annapolis Valley on one of his leaves. At the time, the sale of apples was controlled by the government, and almost all of it was canned due to war rationing. Sale was controlled, but donations were not. So Stevens convinced a farmer to donate 3 barrels of apples to the men at this base. This is the site of the former number 5 base, and there is not much here anymore, although you can sort of tell where the location was by the scrub brush. There are some foundations, but that's about it. You can imagine that living here would have been a lonely and desolate experience, especially in the winter. There was not a lot to do. So at some point there was a need for some, let's just say, extracurricular activity. The men were on the radio regularly to the fighter aerodrome, which was staffed by the Royal Canadian Air Force's Women's Division. You can probably guess what happened next. That radio hotline, well, it turned into an unofficial dating service. Occasionally while on leave, some of the men here would end up meeting the women they spoke to over the radio back in Halifax, but it didn't happen all that often. Yet, on a summer day in 1944, those stationed here were surprised to find 11 Women's Division operators show up at the Monastery Railway Station, 60 miles away, unannounced. The number 5 station transport driver, Doug Barkhouse, stopped by the station to pick up the women. Back at the base, the administration office was cleared out and quickly turned into quarters for the women. The women were treated like royalty, though you can only imagine what their thoughts were arriving in such a desolate and remote place. Nonetheless, after 2 days, they were back on the train on their way to Halifax. Over the years, this road was used many times by the servicemen here, who just needed a break and headed down towards Torbay, Sugar Harbour, and Cole Harbour. Well, that's the end of my hike for today, but after the break, I'm going to be headed just east of the Canso Coastal Barrens Wilderness area, where Black Duck Cove Park offers a nice, easy hike along the shore. A little to the east of the edge of the Canso Coastal Barrens, and just south of the small community of Little Dover, you'll find the Black Duck Cove Day Use Park. And here, a 3.5 kilometer looped trail that takes you past Black Duck Cove, of course, but also Dover Bay. And it's here that I'm on my walkabout today. It's a beautiful fall day here along the coast with some low-lying fog making it just a little dramatic. The first part of my hike, which I'm doing counterclockwise, takes me along Black Duck Cove. While there isn't a lot of information about the origin of the name, it's almost certainly named because people saw and likely hunted black ducks here. This is not the only Black Duck Cove in Canada, or for that matter, even in Nova Scotia. There is a Black Duck Cove in Indian Harbour near Peggy's Cove, and at least 2 others along the eastern shore, aside from this one, including one near Tangier and another near Clam Harbour. There is actually a decent-sized population of black ducks in Nova Scotia. In fact, it's estimated that anywhere between 12,000 and 13,000 of them overwinter here every year. Now that, combined with the fact that the bird is very popular with hunters, is probably at least one reason why there are so many black duck coves in Nova Scotia and elsewhere. In the 1980s, a court case was filed in the United States because, beginning in the 1960s, the population of the black duck began to decline. It's that court case which eventually resulted in the North American Waterfowl Management Plan. The goal of that plan is to return waterfowl populations to 1970 levels. As a direct outcome of the court case and the plan, seasonal restrictions and bag limits on hunting of black ducks in Canada were established in 1984, and in the United States a year earlier. Well, you might expect that with the limits placed on black duck hunting in Nova Scotia and elsewhere, that the number of ducks in the population would have increased substantially. That didn't happen. Studies done in the 1980s showed that despite both management plans, which obviously reduced the hunting pressure, and a significant reduction in hunters, the population in the Atlantic Flyway stayed more or less the same. Now, the management plan itself had the goal of raising the number of ducks to around 385,000. But it leveled off at around 290,000. Black ducks are closely related to mallards, and they will sometimes crossbreed. These are 2 species of duck who don't follow the mantra, birds of a feather flock together. They are happy to commingle. Hybrids are hard to detect, but traces of green or white indicate ducks, which aren't true black ducks, but rather crossbreeds with mallards. Over the past few decades, there have been numerous projects to improve and increase habitat for black duck and other waterfowl. Unfortunately, in Nova Scotia, while the black duck population is healthy and is not at risk of becoming endangered, the population just has not increased as hoped. And in some areas, breeding populations have actually declined. Well, I'm rounding the headland of the park now, and I'm looking out towards Dover Bay. And if it wasn't for the fog bank in the distance, I'd be able to see Little Dover White Island. Now, everywhere you see the name of that island written, the word white is either in quotation marks or brackets, which makes me wonder whether it's 2 different names that are used or whether there's some kind of different pronunciation. I'm honestly not sure which it is, but I do know that in the official records, that is how it is spelled and that is how it is written. From here, I'm going to be continuing my journey along the headland in towards Little Dover itself. Where you think a place named Dover is along Nova Scotia's Atlantic coast may very well depend on what part of the province you're most familiar with. Little Dover here is found about 7 kilometers southwest of the town of Canso. But the place name is not uncommon. Not far from Peggy's Cove, you'll find West and East Dover, along with Dover Castle Island and Dover Island. Down here at the Little Dover on this end of the mainland, you'll find another Dover Island, as well as Little Dover White Island, and a number of other bays, rivers, and a harbor sporting the name Dover as well. It's all but certain that Little Dover, and in fact all the Dovers in Nova Scotia, were named after Dover, England, which is a small town and major ferry port in Kent in the southwest of the UK. Songs have been written about the spectacular white cliffs of Dover, and pilots during World War II often talked about the relief in seeing those cliffs as they flew back from battles in France. The name Dover in England itself has an origin, coming from the River Dower, a 4-mile-long river with underground chalk streams. The word Dower itself is a Celt word for the waters, which in many respects seems appropriate here in Nova Scotia, since the Dovers here are all along coastline with plenty of islands and inlets. Little Dover, like so many of the communities in this area, historically has relied on fishing for income and also to keep the town going. Little Dover itself, well, it was established in 1860 officially. But the first European settlers seem to have arrived in 1824 when the Salt family surveyed 200 acres. Well, this marks the end of my hike here. Up ahead is a breakwater which marks the start of Dover Harbour. And across from that, just over there, well, that's Sheep Island, where, as you can imagine, they kept sheep, just like so many islands around Nova Scotia. German film director Werner Herzog once said, "The world reveals itself to those who travel on foot." So it was here, and so it was on the Barrens. And it's what I hope for you on your next walkabout.
Hey, come on, feel the sunshine. Oh, come on, won't you be mine? Hey, come on, feel the sunshine. Oh, come on, won't you be mine? Hey, come on, feel the sunshine.